Have you ever been to Brooklyn? Well, you come to Brooklyn if you are creative, and no place in Brooklyn, I think, is really more creative than Red Hook, my neighborhood. We have to be. We're isolated. We are the scruffy little hook-shaped peninsula in the middle of New York Harbor without a subway, 20 minutes by kayak or bicycle to Wall Street. My neighbors all make things. I make city plans. Bidet makes Wi-Fi networks. Dustin began with art, now he has Pioneer Works. Sinjin had a recipe for a cocktail, now he has Fort Defiance. Each one of these people has found a place for their talents in our neighborhood, and their talents have shaped our neighborhood. Our neighborhood has character, but don't confuse character with cute coffee shops. Character in a community, like character in people, is revealed only when it is tested. And we were tested by Hurricane Sandy, the biggest storm to hit New York in its history. I defied the evacuation order to stay and watch. Maybe because I was chief urban designer at the time and I had studied hurricanes and cities and their interactions. I wanted to see it personally, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. When you see your city underwater, when you see everything devastated, you realize no matter how big, how great your city is, the water is greater. So I learned a new word with Hurricane Sandy, resilience. And I had to ask, is Red Hook resilient? To find out, I decided to study resilience. I wrote a book about it. I joined the faculty of the Stevens Institute of Technology. We combine hydrodynamics, urban design, complex computational modeling in order to find out. We made computer models of cities, and then we flooded them with computer models of storms, and we developed an equation, a graph, to measure resilience. How much could your system recover of its previous capacity in a given amount of time? The more we studied this, though, the more I felt that cities were in danger. And yet, something didn't seem right. It didn't match historical fact. Something was wrong with our equation about physical resilience. You see, this equation, because you're struggling always to get back to where you were before, means that with repeated shocks, if you don't get back to 100%, eventually you go to zero. And cities have not gone to zero. 99% of the cities that we started in history are still here today. And they have overcome things like earthquakes, like terrorists, like disease, the plague, you name it. They have overcome these challenges without supercomputers, without PhDs, and they are better than they were before. So I had to ask, is there something inherent in cities that is resilient? Now, I have an idea, but it's not my idea. I had a mentor once, a politician who was also a great man when the two things were not incompatible. His name was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senior senator from New York. He thought architecture important, and he wanted to have an architect on staff. So we would talk for hours about cities. I was officially the advisor, but I was getting the advice, and he would tell me how to combine politics and finance and design, in his experience, how to make things happen in cities. And whenever I would say something intelligent, which was not, unfortunately, very frequently, he would say, spoken like a true Athenian. My mom is Greek, so I thought this is probably a nod to my heritage. Well, no, I was wrong. It had nothing to do with that. But I didn't find that out until later. He was giving me a clue about cities, but I didn't find out, actually, until he died, what he meant. We had his memorial service at his alma mater, the Maxwell School of Public Service. And when I went there, waiting in the lobby, I looked up and I saw an inscription chiseled into the wall that he would have passed every day. This inscription was the oath of the Athenians. It had basically three parts. It said, 1, revere the gods. 2, obey the laws. And 3, leave the city better than you found it. That's it. That's the key to cities thriving. You see, our graph was wrong. It's not that you struggle to get back to 100%. You get back to 110%, to 200%. We had missed social systems in describing physical systems because the Athenian Oath embodies the notion of civic virtue. And that notion implies a compact, a responsibility between a citizen and their city, a neighbor and their neighborhood. This is what's called civic virtue in classical learning, and today I would call it social resilience. So, in studying these things, studying urban resilience, you have to acknowledge that urban resilience is a combination of social resilience and physical resilience. Let's look at how that applies to Red Hook. Look, after we were devastated, the only thing that saved us was the volunteers, the thousands of people who came and gave of themselves to help us. Thank you to these volunteers. They showed us that, yes, we as a community, as a neighborhood, had social resilience. But physical resilience, not so much. Our entire peninsula was flooded. Now, we were promised a wall, a flood wall, by the city to solve this. $200 million, of which we learned later that only $100 million was available. And then we learned that out of that 100, only 50 million was actually in the budget. So what are we going to do? As a creative, socially resilient community of makers, we decided, well, maybe we can come up with a plan to build part of this wall. Maybe we can do it from the bottom up. And here's our plan. There's an island in Red Hook called the Long Dock that you see here in the image. It was built in the 19th century out of cobblestones that were brought over in ships from Europe. It was built to about 4 feet high and served as a dock. But it gives us an inspiration for a seawall. It's a Dutch idea. A seawall built in the water is called a polder. What if we use sand and rocks to build a new island, but this time we make it 20 feet high above the water and 100 feet out from the island we have right now? It can protect us from the flooding that comes with hurricanes, what's called the storm surge. Let's map a pattern of streets and buildings and lots onto the land. We can put maritime industrial onto the port side, residential onto the seaside. A canal can go down the middle to catch rainwater and protect us from flooding from rainfall as well. What would it look like? Well, if you're standing on the industrial side, it would look like this, a working waterfront with new jobs. If you stood in the middle and looked along the canal, you'd see small workshops like we have today in Red Hook on the right, and then across the water, new housing apartment buildings, low for New York, but plenty for Red Hook. And finally, if you stood on the seaside, you would look at the sunset over the Statue of Liberty from a park on top of our seawall, planted and open, like the most beautiful promenade, but 20 feet high, so they would act as a barrier to storm surge. Now, we've asked a lot from our little island project. It has to do many things: protect us from flood, from sea, and from rain, to create room for jobs and houses, and to provide a park that helps us build our social cohesion. And we have to ask it to do one thing more if we hope to make it a reality. We have to ask it to pay for itself. How? It's going to cost $100 million. Well, people are looking for places to live and work in New York. With our little island project, we'll create about 1 million square feet of new building rights, what you see in green on the diagram. Now, how much are builders in Brooklyn today willing to pay for a building right? About $100 a square foot. So do the math. 1 million square feet times $100 per square foot equals $100 million, the same amount it will cost to build our new island. The project can pay for itself. Let's do it. What are the next steps? First, let's check the hydrodynamics. Does it actually protect us in the right way from the movement of the waters? Check. 2, let's check all our numbers. Every use on every floor of every building has to be calculated, appraised, and weighed against the cost of the new island. And 3, because remember what Senator Moynihan taught me, politics, finance, and design. The politics. How, politically, do you build an island in New York Harbor? Who owns the land? What's the law? So we did some research on this. And we found something very interesting. It turns out that in 1923, the legislature of New York passed a law and the governor of New York signed it, authorizing the creation and transfer to the city of New York of a new island in New York Harbor. This island, Red Hook Island, it's huge. We were just planning a little one up there by that little hook. This is 275 acres, a third the size of Central Park. But where is it? You can't see it unless you look underwater. If you look at the bathymetry, which is the underwater topography map, you will see a triangle there. That triangle is not natural in its shape. It is man-made. We began to build this island. We built this island up to 10 feet below the level of the water. So now let's apply the same thinking we applied to our small island to this larger one. Let's give it the same requirements. Protect us to 20 feet above sea level, provide reservoirs for rainfall, increase our maritime jobs, increase our housing, increase our social cohesion, and pay for itself. Well, we do that by mapping city blocks onto it, and there's precedent for this. The Dutch have done it in Rotterdam. We can do it in Brooklyn. We just have to make more Brooklyn. So what if we built these new maritime facilities and created our jobs on the port side? And on the water side, we built the most amazing new waterfront park and nature habitat on the harbor, bringing back diversity of nature that we haven't had in New York Harbor for 200 years, and rising high enough to protect us, with blocks and blocks of Brooklyn behind it. And what if, just like our little island, we made it pay for itself? So here are the numbers. It's expensive, yes, about $3.5 billion in infrastructure costs. But now, we are creating 35 million square feet of new building rights. Remember the $100 per square foot? Multiply it by the 35 million. What do we have? $3.5 billion in revenue. It can pay for itself. But what do all these square feet mean in terms of people, in terms of community? Well, it means there's enough room for 20,000 new families, almost 70,000 new people. And it's room for 60,000 new jobs to support those families. And the schools and the groceries and the libraries and the parks on which we build our community, that's the social resilience we can build. And the physical resilience, it provides a breakwater for all of Southwest Brooklyn. It makes us safe from the next Hurricane Sandy. So let us finish the job that we started in 1923 and build this island. But let's do it in a way that expresses civic virtue. Let's build it in a way that builds social resilience as well as physical resilience, that grows character as well as community. Discovering this island is a gift. New York City will grow by 1 million people in the next 30 years. You may well be among those people who come to New York. And if the question is where you will call home, the answer may well be more Brooklyn. Thank you all.